Well, we're now joined by the Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. Premier, really appreciate you taking the time once again. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
Listen, I want to begin our discussion today with the electricity regulations, the ones being proposed by Ottawa, because you did turn to social media, and I'm going to read this message out to our viewers, because in this message you say the following: "It is time for the Prime Minister to side with Canadians instead of his ideological environment minister. If the power goes out in minus 30 or plus 30, Albertans and Canadians know that won't end well." Why the choice of the word ideological in describing Steven Guilbeault?
Well, there's no other way to describe it. I've been talking with the Prime Minister since actually my very first conversation with him, saying that we were aligned on trying to get to carbon neutrality by 2050. I told him that we would bring forward an emissions reduction and energy development plan. We did in April. I said I wanted to establish a working group where we could align our various objectives. We did. We have a working group happening right now. And yet you have Steven Guilbeault acting as if none of that's going on, that none of the concessions that we've made and none of the approaches that we've made to find some common ground matter. And the real problem that we have in Alberta is the absolute reality, is that we are facing the potential already of having instability in our grid. And if we don't have a mechanism to bring new baseload power on, we're going to end up with the same problems that you see in Germany and California and Texas. And I just can't stand by and watch our power grid fail, blackouts occur, especially in the dark of winter and the heat of summer. And that's what we are trying to make the federal government understand, is we simply can't achieve the targets that they put out by 2035. We have to work towards 2050.
You know, what's interesting, as you say that, though, is, of course, really no other province is engaging the kind of pushback that Alberta is doing right now on these regulations. Is that because Alberta's situation is so reliant on natural gas for electricity generation?
That is exactly the reason. We made a decision to phase out coal at great expense. Not only did it cost us to pay out the stranded assets, but we then had to build a new grid based on natural gas with solar and wind as intermittent power. And then the federal government has come along just as those plants are only 10 years old, saying not good enough, you've got to phase them out too. And so I think you've got a bit of exasperation in Alberta that we're moving in the right direction. There are other provinces that are exposed, though. Saskatchewan also has a large amount of coal on their grid, and Nova Scotia and New Brunswick do too. And I'm a bit fearful that the residents in those provinces don't realize how at risk they are. So we're taking the lead. We tried to do this behind closed doors through negotiation to make the federal government see reason, and they just continue to come at us. And so we're trying to make sure that people understand there's 4 provinces who are going to be really, really damaged by this, and that we would like their help in trying to get a carve out so that we can all work together towards a 2050 goal.
Okay, 2050, and to contextualize that, the clean electricity regulations aiming it in 12 years, you're going back the original goal plan or goal posts of 2050. But you know, there was a reception this week in Ottawa that the Prime Minister attended. I know you're well aware of it. It was with a group of Alberta business leaders who did come to the nation's capital. And the Prime Minister, he did not name names, but he did say that there are politicians who would rather deny facts of climate change than take action. And by denying facts, he argues, are denying certainty for investors, opportunities for workers, and denying kids a future they deserve. What's your reaction to that pushback from the Prime Minister? Again, not naming names, but politicians in general who don't agree.
I'm not sure who he's talking about, because he's not talking about me. I have said that we need to reduce emissions and get to carbon neutrality by 2050. I wish that the media would also report exactly what those business leaders told him time and time again in every meeting, that 2035 was not achievable in Alberta, would result in a lack of investment, lack of stability, and they're aligned with our target of 2050. Some think that they could even get there by 2045. And so I would say that the business community in Alberta, our Alberta electric system operator, and us are aligned on the same target, which is 2050 at emissions neutrality. You even saw in Ontario, their electric system operator also expressed concern about the lack of stability and reliability of trying to attain a target too early. So this isn't about denialism. This is about what is achievable. We need to achieve the target that also ensures reliability and affordability. That's what a power grid is for, is so that when people turn the lights on, it comes on. When people need their furnace turned on, it comes on. And it's our obligation as a province, which has the exclusive jurisdiction That's what it says in the Constitution, exclusive jurisdiction to manage our power grid, to be very forceful in ensuring that we're protecting our consumers. And that's what I'm doing.
Do you undermine that argument, though, by the very fact that your government has put a moratorium on new wind and solar projects, alternative fuel sources, renewable fuel sources, and to be fair, it's a 6-month moratorium. But as you're making this argument of what the province can't achieve, that is a policy that you put in place in August.
They're connected, there's no question. Because when we bring on wind and solar, we have to have a natural gas backup. That's why we have so much wind and solar development in our province, is that when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, we're able to bring on natural gas peaker plants. Stephen Guilbeault is making that illegal. He has said that any plant that comes on stream has to have 95% of its emissions abated by 2035, or the executives will go to jail. That's the reason we don't have any more investment coming forward on baseload power and natural gas, is because of the uncertainty they've created. And if I can't bring on baseload power, I can't bring on more wind and solar, because we'll end up with grid instability. So it's a real bind that we're in. We want to make sure that we can get to reliability, make sure that we have a responsible amount of wind and solar coming on, make sure we have enough baseload, address the issues of where wind and solar are being built. They shouldn't be built on prime agriculture land, address the issues of end of life. These wind turbines, because they have 850 cubic meters of concrete, take 1 million or more to reclaim. We have to make sure we're not saddling the landowner with those costs. So we have to be deliberate in how we do this. We want to make sure that we have an environment where everybody can feel safe to invest. But number one, we have to make sure that the power grid itself won't fail. That's got to be our number one goal.
Okay. I do want to ask one more thing here in regards to the regulations, because you've already raised the specter of using Alberta's Sovereignty Act to oppose it. At what point will you trigger that? I know you're having your own officials and your cabinet looking into it, but at what point would you trigger the invocation of that act?
There's three things. If they proceed with the 2035 net zero power grid that will criminalize the building of natural gas units, we won't use it. If they bring through an aggressive emissions cap on our natural gas and oil sector, they've been talking about 42% reduction by 2030, which would essentially be a production cap, we'll use it. And if they bring through an over-aggressive emissions target on methane, we've already reduced methane 45%. We're continuing to move on that, but we're hearing some pretty troubling signs that they also want to set a target that's unrealistic and unachievable by 2030. Those would be the three things. As I said, we are aligned around 2050. I know and have confidence in my business sector that as they start seeing new incremental improvements in technology, as we start having the time frame to be able to develop some of those new technologies, we can get there by 2050. But I have to be realistic, and I have to be practical, and I have to be truthful. And the truth is 2035 is not achievable, and the federal government needs to know it.
Now, we did ask the Environment Minister, Stephen Guilbeault, to respond to Smith's suggestion that those who do not follow the electricity regulations could face prison time. A spokesperson for the minister told us the following, quote, Premier Smith is hung up on the fact that the regulations are under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, which is a piece of criminal law. But her fears are wildly unfounded. It is not realistic that any power plant will go to jail in instances of non-compliance. First, they'd get warnings, then progressively larger fines. It is just fear-mongering, says Guilbeault's office, and overheated rhetoric.